right, so good evening at 7 o'clock, and I'd like to call the December 5th meeting of the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission to order. Will staff please call the roll?
Stacy Gloss. Dustin Allred.
Present.
Claire Johnson.
Present.
Beth Mashesky.
Here.
Todd Rusk.
Here.
Andrew Stump.
Here.
Morgan White.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Okay, so in your packet that was sent out last week, a copy of the minutes from the November meeting was included. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes as distributed? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
All right. Great. All in favor of approving the minutes from November 7th, say aye.
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 All right, that passes. Public input. At this time, if a member of the public can make any comments, if anybody would like to speak before the commission, feel free at this time. You may come up to the mic. Okay. I would like to welcome Eric Jacobson from the City Council to our meeting this evening. Thank you for being present. It's good to have you here.
I guess I would only say that my lack of comment does not signify lack of interest.
All right. If there's no public input or public comment at this time, we'll move forward with the staff report.
Good evening, Council, Commission, sorry. I've got a couple of updates on the Climate Action Plan first. You may recall in 2015 and 2016, Urbana, the city with partners, participated in the Georgetown University Energy Prize. This was a competition between cities to reduce greenhouse gases and improve energy efficiency. It was specifically focused at the household level, or the household residential sector, as well as the municipal sector. And we participated in that program by combining the small group meeting method of a workbook called Low Carbon Diet with a climate change play performed by the School for Designing a Society. So we had a number of those performances and a number of small group meetings where we work through the Low Carbon Diet book, which helps households improve the energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions from their homes and their lifestyles. Urbana was selected to be one of 50 cities that participated in that competition nationally. We were not selected to the finalist round, which is 10 cities, but we did get an honorable mention in their recent press release about their selection of the 10 finalist cities. So a good showing and a good project for us. It was the Low Carbon Diet's a nice way to get into the residential sector and also get at behaviors rather than just technologies that have an impact on energy efficiency and climate pollution. The next note is regarding the United Nations Climate Conference, COP23. I gave somewhat of a long talk for me anyway, at City Council, so some of you may have seen that, so I won't repeat that. But for folks who didn't see it, I'll mention that COP23 is the 23rd Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's why they call it COP23 for short. The purpose of the meeting was to convert the Paris Agreement into monitoring, reporting, verification, really laying out the pathway and the ground rules for how the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement will be implemented and will be verified by the separate countries. There was also, which sounds very technical and bureaucratic, but the conference has an enormous amount of sessions and activities, and the broader set of activities discussed quite a range of issues, including clean energy, climate resilience, gender, and indigenous rights. The one theme that was present throughout the entire conference was a commitment to stay the course on the Paris Agreement and deliver a climate with under 1.5 degrees Celsius to future generations. Another theme that was throughout the conference was a hashtag, We Are Still In, and that specifically meant U.S. cities and other non-state actors in the U.S. are still in with the Paris Agreement. As you know, the Trump administration has begun the process of withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. But U.S. cities, some states, community groups wanted to reassure their friends and colleagues throughout the world that most of the U.S., I think the polls are something like 70% of the U.S. Supports staying the course with the Paris Agreement, and cities are absolutely committed to developing the clean energy economy and still in with the Paris Agreement. Cities and regions and other non-state actors responded to the Trump administration's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement in two ways at COP23. One was to create a people's delegation that would deliver that "we are still in" message from community groups as well as cities and other non-state actors. The second response was to create a U.S. Climate Action Center at COP23. This was the first year ever in the history of the conference that the United States declined to host a pavilion at the conference. A pavilion at COP23 is kind of like a trade show booth, only many countries have pavilions that are much bigger than what you would imagine a trade show booth. And the pavilions promote the work that is happening in their respective countries on reducing climate pollution. So for the first year ever, the U.S. declined to host a pavilion itself. And so different donors and climate advocates created the U.S. Climate Action Center instead, an unofficial pavilion for the United States. It was interesting in two ways. One, it was bigger than any other country's pavilion. And two, it was located just outside the official negotiators zone at COP23. And so it was closer to the official negotiators than any other pavilion. So quite a dramatic statement. The U.S. Climate Action Center hosted discussions, presentations, small group meetings, and educational sessions all around subnational governments and other non-state actors in the U.S. Taking action to reduce climate pollution and develop the clean energy economy. It was a great experience to be with all those folks. I participated in telling Urbana's story about what we're doing, and that was very well received. We certainly felt the tension that other delegates from other countries had regarding U.S. action, but I think they were very well reassured by our message. So, moving on into the staff report, we're letting you know about some public engagement. I recently spoke to an urban planning class about sustainability planning, as well as Champaign County Forest Preserve all-staff meeting about energy efficiency and renewable energy. Particularly, I took a lot of time sharing with them where Illinois stands in developing solar energy resources. We're poised to add a lot of solar to Illinois with the Future Energy Jobs Act, and I was sharing with them how they can participate in that. U-Cycle is celebrating the 10th anniversary of the city's battery recycling drop-off program. Many of you probably are using that. We collect at 5 different locations, including the city building here. We collect batteries like AA, AAA, D-cell batteries, and we collect rechargeable, non-rechargeable, button cell, all kinds of small batteries, and an enormous amount. We end up doing collections from these 5 locations once a week, and we bulk that in 55-gallon drums, and we have a vendor who takes that off-site and recycles it. We spend somewhere around $7,000 a year on this, and it's a nice program. What's interesting about recycling batteries is you're taking a lot of weight out of the waste stream. It's not a lot of volume because they're dense, but it's a lot of weight. And so there's some details there. Very popular service with the public. UCycle also celebrated America Recycles Day. We typically do some programming along with the Urbana Park District, and there's some information about that this year. And I've also included the summary from our recent electronics recycling. We don't have this inputted so you can compare year on year with our past events, but I wanted to include just a summary of this year. As you can see, TV and monitor CRTs, still huge volume coming through. I don't know when we will finally collect the last CRT TV or even see that crest, but that's where all of our expenses really, because there's not any recoverable value there. So that continues. I've got a commission schedule for next year and a agenda item for you all to make a motion to accept that. Of course, we sometimes change dates, change locations, cancel meetings. That's fine, but I think it's state statute requires us to have a set schedule for the year. I've already moved what would otherwise be the first Tuesday of January to the second Tuesday on this meeting. Even that January 9th date may not be viable for some number of commissioners, so that's for you all to discuss tonight if you want to try and have a January 9th meeting or cancel that and go to February. And other than that, our next meeting on the schedule would be January 9th at 7 p.m. in council chambers.
Any questions for Scott?
What are the units on the collection net total?
Pounds.
Okay. And
Sorry about that.
can you remind me where I can find a list of all the projects and their status of completed, continuous?
For the Climate Action Plan? So that's a spreadsheet I maintain. It was in packet last SAC meeting. I'm happy to share it at any time.
Is it like online or?
No, it's a Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. Is it possible to have it available online, if at least a PDF?
I could post a PDF from time to time.
Are there any other questions for Scott?
So, on the Georgetown University Energy Prize, last time I checked, I didn't see a listing of the 10 communities that were selected. I looked after your update, and anyways, have you seen anything on those 10 communities? Because I want to find out what they're. Okay, there they are. Oh, you sent that along too. Okay, okay, you downloaded. Okay, well,
I
you're
think
better.
that Georgetown did a press release that
Okay.
included those, and actually we did an email press release on the same, and I think the 10 were listed in
Yeah.
ours. It might not
Here
have been
they
picked
are.
up by the News Gazette.
Here they are. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I just glossed over that. Well, I want to look into those and see what are they doing that we are not doing, because there might be some interesting strategies in there. The other thing is you talked about the Climate Action Center at the COP21, and any discussion of next steps or follow-up or any other follow-on items for that group or any of the participants.
I don't know about the collaborators who put together the Climate Action Center. there were a couple of outcomes. Our professional association, ICLEI, launched a couple of new initiatives. They're creating a city climate planner professional accreditation. They're also working on, and I think this is going to be a build out from their greenhouse gas modeling tool, but they're going to be developing additional vertical and horizontal monitoring, reporting, and verification. I don't know exactly how that'll turn out. I don't know if that'll mean greenhouse gas inventories might be nested vertically or horizontally. I'm hoping that it'll create the possibility for cities that are using their greenhouse gas accounting like Urbana, create the opportunity for them to engage horizontally to other cities to do the same, so that there's more folks who know where they stand. When you measure yourself, you're more likely to improve. So I think that's important. Certainly with Energy Star buildings, we've seen that just measuring drives people to improve. There was also another pavilion, a non-state pavilion at COP23 called the Cities and Regions Pavilion. The role of cities and regions has been increasing over the last few years at the COPs. It used to be very much, there was the official negotiators, and there were the advocates who were trying to bend the ear of the negotiators, and that was the conference. But now, increasingly, subnational governments and non-state actors are being given more of a seat at the table. So the Cities and Regions Pavilion is kind of the culmination of that. And they put out a Bon Fiji commitment document, and it listed essentially that they're committed to the Paris Agreement, that they'll deliver it at all levels of government. And then they listed a number of new initiatives. Some of those are the ICLEI initiatives I mentioned, others are other initiatives. And that was in a city council packet 2 weeks ago, I think, at Committee of the Whole. Obviously, you can keyword search that and find it as well. So that's some of the outcomes there. It may be that the funders and donors will have to fund yet another U.S. Climate Action Center next year at COP24 in Poland, where they'll be going a little bit further down the road in terms of developing the pathway. In fact, I think they're scheduled to finish the implementation of the Paris Agreement at COP24 in Poland. So there may well be another U.S. Climate Action Center, another unofficial U.S. pavilion next year at COP24.
I'm glad you mentioned the cities and regions group, because that's I think that's an exciting area, and that's where it's closer to direct control over emissions and what's going on. Obviously, the states themselves have something to do, but
yeah, other countries may have things like a national electrical grid, but we don't. We have a number of regional transmission organizations that move power around regions. Within those transmission organizations, we have investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, rural co-ops, and so there is a lot of authority discretion at subnational levels in the U.S., which for some, compared to some other countries, is very different. And so there is the ability for cities and regions already have a lot of discretion and control. And the Cities and Regions Pavilion is just giving them credit as a stakeholder, as an important stakeholder.
One other thing is wondering if there's any updates on the performance contract status.
Sure. We are working further on developing the scope, and we're working on developing financing options. And so the scope, I think we're close to finishing, and then we'll have to work through with the finance director on what our options are for getting a loan. That will determine the final scope, in fact. So depending on what financing options are available, we may have a different size project. So that's where we're at.
Yeah. So I mean, you probably, I'm sure you know that the Ameren, Illinois incentive programs are going to be switching to, they're going to be updated in 2018 and new programs, and obviously that will have some effect on it. I got a preliminary word that there could be some interesting lighting incentives that could play into what's going on. So anyways, that could be something we take a closer look at.
Yeah, there's our vendor has listed incentives, which the only incentives available are the Ameren
Yeah.
Act on Energy
Yeah.
utility incentives. But they've listed those for all the items that qualify based on the program expected at the time the project finishes.
Right.
And so there is some significant street lighting incentives.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for staff this evening? Okay. We have a presentation this evening on small-scale wind energy by Dylan Harmon, who I'd like to recognize. Does anyone have an introduction for
Sure.
Dylan?
I'll introduce
you.
Dylan. Have a seat. Dylan is a University of Illinois student. He's been working with me, or maybe I've been working with him, is probably more accurate, developing feasibility for small-scale wind energy within the city. So the city of Urbana has a wind turbine ordinance, describes different size and type of systems that are permittable within different zones. And so, everyone's familiar with the giant utility scale wind turbines that are out in the country, but we have this ordinance, and the question is is what was feasible at a small scale in the city. So I'll turn it over to you, Dylan.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you guys for letting me come in and talk to you tonight. I appreciate it. So yeah, as Scott said, I'm a student at the university. I'm a third-year mechanical engineer, and since arriving on campus, sustainability is something that I've grown into sort of my passion. And so I reached out to Scott about a year ago trying to figure out if there was some sort of sustainability project I could work on. We had a conversation, and this is a project that I chose. So this is just a summary of my findings, and I hope that you learn as much as I did from this presentation. So to begin, just an overview of context, which many of you probably already know, but wind energy is nothing new. It's a ubiquitous source of energy on this planet, and people have been harnessing it forever, essentially. Persians used it to mill grain. The Netherlands used it to keep their lowlands from flooding, and of course sailors used it to move their ships around. Pretty basic stuff. Until eventually the advent of electricity, not very long ago, and then we found this whole new application for it. So whenever you think of wind, you probably think of something like this, or most people do at least, these large-scale industrial turbines. And these take large investments and create large outputs. And being that that's what wind tends to be thought of, putting it in an urban environment is something that people are like, well, why don't we just scale it up? It's a lot more financially feasible, and you produce a lot more electricity, so why even bother with the small scale? And that's what I think makes this project a bit more unique, is trying to see, okay, so this works, but how small can we go and it can still be something worth doing? So I'm calling it rooftop wind because I think it's akin to rooftop solar in the fact that it's for residences and it's a small scale sort of thing. In general, what I mean when I say rooftop wind is small scale things, so anything from just a few feet to maybe even 100 feet or so, something that just isn't quite industrial scale. It could be roof mounted, it could be in the yard with cable tethers, it could even be vertical axis turbines, so the classic turbines that people tend to think of are horizontal axis turbines, and those only work when the wind blows directly perpendicular to them. But the great thing about vertical axis turbines is it doesn't matter which way the wind blows, but it produces electricity regardless. So these on small scales can be productive, even if they just light just a light bulb on a rooftop, for example. So throughout this whole process, I ran into a few key considerations that anybody looking to install a wind turbine or even thinking about it should consider. And one is this idea of maximum power production. And this occurs whenever you're at the highest heights you can be at and whenever your turbine's the biggest. So already not looking too great for small-scale wind. But this is important to remember regardless of where you're trying to install one. So yeah, at higher altitudes you have the fastest speeds because there's less obstructions on the ground for it to get in the wind's way. And another benefit, especially whenever you consider horizontal axis turbines, is it's directionally more consistent higher up, so you don't have all these awkward gusts that can provide awkward torques to your turbine and damage it. So yeah, in terms of power production and turbines, bigger is better. And that is important to remember. So we're just trying to see how small can we get and still be good enough. Another issue is just basic turbulence. So in fluids, there's laminar and turbulent flows. Laminar, everything goes in the same direction, and turbulent, pretty much the opposite of that. They go wherever they want. And turbulence is caused on the local scale, down on the ground where we are, predominantly by maybe mild pressure or temperature fluctuations due to buildings or trees or things like that. And the issue with these things is that it makes wind less consistent. I mean, you can walk down the street and you can walk by an alleyway and your hat blows off, you know? Like, it's just not very consistent, and that's not a very suitable environment for some turbines to be in. And that's something else that needs to be considered. So up on rooftops is better as long as it's maybe the highest thing in the area, or vertical axis turbine is a good way to go to avoid this kind of problem. And of course, something that's a problem with every renewable energy technology is intermittency. And wind's no different. Depending on where you are, it can vary by season even, and obviously by the day. It tends to blow more at night than it does during the day. And this is important to remember as well, because you can't, as I'm sure all of you know, you can't just switch over automatically. You'll need supplemental systems in order for something like this to work, which is good to remember, because then it's like there's not just rooftop wind that we should install. It's how can we transform everything so that we can be reliant on supplemental systems all around. So we could have solar and geothermal and wind, and then they'll all work together and we won't ever have any gaps. But that needs to be reminded. You can't just switch all at once. And of course, the most popular one is just NIMBYism in general. I'm aware that, I'm not sure if it was the city or just campus in general, a few years back had some issues installing a large-scale turbine, and it wasn't very popular. And it got shot down. So, and this is a problem that I think a lot of well-intended projects might run into. And I think rooftop wind, if that's something that the city would like to pursue, it's not going to be any different. And I think the best way to avoid this is to make the people making the decisions and the ones that they're making the decisions on behalf of need to work a bit more together. So if you start a program to support rooftop wind, then someone hears about it and they're like, I don't want rooftops on my rooftops. I don't want turbines on my rooftops. That there shouldn't be an us versus them sort of narrative. We should bring people together and they should get support first. And they should be, I think the city ought to provide resources for interested people to do it rather than the city make it a requirement or start doing it on their own. At least that's what I think. So all of these important things considered, I came to the conclusion that either small-scale vertical axis turbines, maybe just a few feet tall, or medium-sized turbines that are maybe on larger commercial lots are the best bet for this city. So what I mean by vertical axis turbines, these could be on anything from the public works building or on top of a parking garage, and they could be powering electronics that are right next to them, for example. Or medium-sized turbines that are in larger lots like the ones that the Dart factory has, or maybe in a parking lot that doesn't get much use, something like that. Maybe even in the fairgrounds, there's a large area there. And looking at the ordinance, really the biggest constraint in terms of size of these turbines is it just needs to be as far away from the property lines as it is tall, so that's relatively easy to do as long as you have a big enough space, so that's not too much of an issue. So this is a nightmare of a slide. You don't have to look too much into it, but I did a payoff analysis for a turbine called the Berge 15. It's a small-scale turbine, and you can have any towers from 60 feet to 160 feet. And these would be for the medium-sized turbine. I hope it's not too pixelated for you guys, but the first column, the larger chart, shows the profit year to year as it goes along. And as you can see, it's not wonderful. I mean, it's not until about year 20 that it'll pay itself off. And that's just because this is a large investment. I mean, the turbine itself costs a significant amount, but you also have to pay for the wiring kits and the foundation and things like that. And it's just a hefty investment. It's about $75,000. And this isn't even a large industrial turbine. And this is just one, too. So it's difficult to make it terribly profitable. I would have loved to have looked into these numbers and found it would pay off very easily and you guys should install one now. But that's just simply not the case. The only thing that this reinforces is that it's a serious undertaking, and again, bigger is better, so it would be nice if you could go bigger, but you obviously can't. You're spatially constrained within the city limits. So I think what I found is that instead, Urbana should focus on maybe not the profitability of this, but rather what sort of message does it send. These medium-scale wind sites, or if you have roof-mounted vertical axis turbines, I think sets the tone of what the community's goals ought to be, and it can get people more involved and make them think about it. Maybe an example that I have is, I know that there's, across the street from the Urbana Free Library, there's just a little booth that says free books, and I think little things like that, whether or not it gets much use, shows that what this community values and how we want to work together. And I think if you set up a turbine maybe closer to a public works building, it would show what this community cares about. And I think that would be maybe more valuable than the kilowatt offsets that it might actually have. So in general, my recommendation is it'd be nice, again, if I could just say, buy this, it'd be wonderful. That's not entirely the case. Buy it maybe is more my suggestion. But focus on educational programs. I think this is a great commission, and I really appreciate that this is something that this city values. But I think community involvement is the biggest thing, because if you got houses themselves trying to, make their conserve energy their own ways and maybe volunteer on their own time, that has large implications too. So somehow creating programs that can get people more involved in that sort of way. In terms of wind, maybe compiling information, I also created a report that has a list of all these online resources that could just be posted online, and anybody who has an inkling about maybe rooftop wind could look into these things and learn a little bit about it. Just providing resources for anybody that wants to take steps on their own is very important. And again, maybe being a bit of an example is important too, I think. And yeah, again, leaving wind. Wind's great, but this is something that my brother actually reminded me. He said, conservation and efficiency are boring, but they're very important. I think projects like what I'm doing here, they get a lot more attention because turbines are cool things, and we can talk about a physical object. But if everyone is just conserved more and was a bit more efficient, that would also be good enough too. If anything, it might be better. So maybe rather than focusing on something like this, just encouraging better habits would be a good idea too. And I also threw something here on the bottom. This was just an idea that I had, but Urbana is a pretty progressive place. You could maybe do a carbon tax pilot. I don't know how easy that is, but that'd be kind of a wild idea. And I don't know how well it would go down, but I think it would be a fun little thing that you guys could look into. Maybe. Just throwing that out there. Don't know. And then one of my professors this semester is all about his quotes at the end of the lectures. So whenever we give presentations, we throw quotes on there. So it's just a habit now. But in general, this first one is about education and why it's important, and the second one is how it's important. So education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So I think that's why it is important. And then David Hume says, truth springs from arguments amongst friends. And I think that shows how you should argue with people. And that's all I got. Thank you guys for letting me speak. If you have any questions, I'll take them. I'll do my best to answer them at least.
Great. Dylan, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. I have one question just about on the small scale vertical turbines that you're talking about that can be roof mounted. what sort of energy profile do they have? How much energy can they produce? You had mentioned kind of like a light bulb. But
Yeah.
I know, electric
I would have
cars
to-
are kind of up and coming and people are interested in electric cars. Is it something that instead of a solar system on a roof, if you didn't have rooftop solar capability, is that something that a resident could install and charge their car overnight?
I would have to look at my notes to know exact answers for that. But to be honest, wind only matches the capacity of solar on larger scales. So if you simply added a rooftop turbine, it would not be nearly as valuable as rooftop solar would. You can supplement the negativity for rooftop wind by putting it on a higher place, like maybe if there's like a 6-story parking garage. I mean, that's a lot higher up in the air, so that's a good thing. But in general, I don't think it has the capacity to do something like charge a car. Yeah. Yeah,
Can you go back to the slide, that one?
the numbered one. Yeah.
So this Berg 15,
Mm-hmm.
is that a rooftop one?
No,
or-
that's a medium-sized turbine. So it's like industrial sized but smaller.
Mhm.
I think
Oh, it says
it should have
is
rotor
it
length.
315 feet? Oh, that's way
Well,
out.
this is for the, I think this is estimates for a 100-foot tower, and it's also using wind speed. I think in the parking lot right by here. Actually, I think I had Bergie run a simulation on average annual wind production here, and this is the information they gave me. And as for the size of the turbine, this is for a 30-foot diameter turbine, so not gigantic, but also not small. So it's sort of in between there. But yeah.
Do you know a basic capacity, just like, is it like 1 kilowatt for a vertical scale or vertical axis turbine?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to check. I'm sorry.
Other questions?
You mentioned education. You happen to know if the local school district has done anything in terms of demonstration or testing or expressed any interest in doing something?
I'm not sure. I'm not terribly in tune with the public school system here.
Okay.
I would imagine they would be interested in it, and I also know, like the list of resources I mentioned earlier, I have several links, and there's programs for wind for schools types projects where they have roof-mounted or turbines in larger fields around them. So there's a lot of potential for those sorts of things. I'm not really sure. I can't speak to how schools right now feel about that, but if they were interested, there are steps they could take to be a bit more involved.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There are other questions? Okay, Morgan.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is something that, like, we did the UC Solar. Can we do UC Wind with this kind of program through MR, I forgot what it was, MREA? I mean, was there something that we had in place that helped us do the UC Solar program that we don't have? Or could we just duplicate it with wind, Scott?
Maybe.
It's plausible, right? Because we already have the pieces in place. Because with UC Solar, there wasn't a cash outlay from the city. Your time was involved, the commission was involved, but spreading the word and encouraging people to do it. The individuals throughout the community who put solar on their roof, they paid for it themselves. And so couldn't we do something similar with wind?
The market for small-scale wind may not be developed enough, and particularly the installer segment. So for instance, the company that Dylan works with, I don't know that they do the install.
No, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a little difference. The solar market is such that you can get competitive quotes from vendors who will both design and install a system at any site, at your site. I'm not sure that that there is such a market in Illinois. We would need to investigate that further. to see if they're, I guess you could investigate it by putting an RFP out and see if anyone responds.
For install, or,
Yeah.
purchase and install.
Yeah, a vendor would
and
have
then
to.
maybe a maintenance agreement or something. Because don't you need a lot more maintenance, I assume, than solar does.
Yeah, I mean, it's very case dependent. Like all the issues I mentioned very much depend on what turbine you decide to use and where you decide to put it. But I would guess, yeah, in general, more maintenance.
So I'm seeing a bunch of 300 watt, 400 watt, 500 watts, kind of cute looking things that are like a reasonable, manageable size. And our home installations are on the order of 5 kW or 5,000 watts. So the manageable looking ones are in order of magnitude smaller than the kinds of solar installations that we're seeing. So what, $500 for this 400 watt one. It's kind of cool looking. And then there's, I saw a picture of like a 2.5 kilowatt one, and that was on a big stout pole. And anyway, it looks like a serious gizmo. Not to say that's prohibitive or anything, but just what was the price on that one? About $5,000 for 2.5 kW or 2,500 watt. And anyway,
Equipment only?
equipment only. Yeah, that one's on eBay.
Yeah.
But anyway, just a sense of few products floating around out there.
I have a question about this slide as well. And I think it is a little bit small on my screen, so I'm not sure that I'm reading it correctly, so I could use a little bit of help. So if I'm looking at the Berge 15 in the smaller table, and it says the cost is $37,500, including the electronics and installation cost. And that at about 100 feet tall, so it's standing 100 feet tall, the turbine, so when you say the turbine, the blades would be about 31 to 32 feet wide. So that
The blades are half that. It's the diameter that's 30 feet, so the
right,
blades are 15.
the overall sort of diameter of the blades all put together would be about 30 feet, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then that could power about 36,000 kilowatt hours per year. Then if I look at the smaller table, it says the equipment cost is $37,500 and total cost is $75,000. I was just curious about the numbers on where that doubling comes from. Maybe it's something I'm not understanding, so some clarification.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, maybe the chart isn't terribly explanatory. For every turbine that you buy, you need to buy the turbine and the tower and the wiring kit, and you need to install a foundation. And amongst other things, but those are the four primary costs that I have here. So from this smaller chart, the costs on the larger chart are a summation of the smaller chart costs, including the Berge 15, one of the self-supporting lattice towers, the wiring kit, and the foundation, as well as all of the other costs in the column. So things like maybe any taxes or maintenance or insurance.
All right, I totally understand now, sort of moving down that chart, that's all additive. All right, that makes a lot of sense. For 36,000 kilowatt hours, if a house, let's say a relatively efficient house was using about 1,000 kilowatt hours per year, and I'm going to say that that's pretty efficient, then something like this could power about 36 homes or offset 36 homes in the community. Are there any resources that off the top of your head would address community scale wind? So I know that you were asking about residential as a residential program, but what about a community sort of program with community investment, since I guess a wind turbine of this size could sort of, at least as a demonstration piece for the city of Urbana, say, hey, look, we're powering 36 homes with us.
Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head, but again, the report that I created does have a list of references that have that are of that sort of nature. So maybe, I think, to Scott's point earlier, It is a less developed sort of market, so I'm not sure how viable those sorts of programs will be in this area. But I also don't see why. I mean, heck, it couldn't just be created too. So, I mean, why not?
Scott, did you have a comment on that?
Regarding, a community wind turbine?
Community, like community funding or community-wide investment.
In terms of a single wind turbine that would have multiple off-takers, looking at this scale and powering a couple dozen houses, you would probably, if you get beyond one or two, buildings or one or two owners, you're probably going to need a power purchase agreement. If you're going into the grid and then coming back down to a house, then you're including Ameren distribution fees, which would, looking at this cash analysis, destroy the feasibility. If you want to do more than one owner at a time, you're probably going to need to scale all the way up to, probably something close to utility scale, if not utility scale, to overcome the fact that you now have to pay Ameren distribution fees. This scale, I think, the reason we targeted this scale was we were contemplating the Urbana Public Works facility. I don't remember, maybe that's right where this is. I don't remember the details.
That's where the assessment comes from.
Yeah.
Electricity consumption for one house is going to be on the order of 5,000 to 10 or 12,000 kilowatt hours per year for a typical single family detached house. If you say maybe like around 500 to 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, that's some people get down to around 300 or 250 during the mild parts of the like April. So anyways, at 36,000 kilowatt hours per year, we're looking at, maybe 3 or 5 houses or something like that.
I would also like to say that while residential is a good thing to focus on, perhaps a better place to focus on would be for it to not be distributed amongst a bunch of different households, but just larger industrial buildings. So it could be attached to like the Public Works building or the Dart factory. So they can have one turbine, they can get around having to have several different owners about it, and they'll also have the space to be able to actually install it on their property. That was sort of the intention where this ended up evolving to. It would be, and again, it would be nice to have something for individual residents to have, but you could also focus on larger property owners in the area.
And that relates to what Dylan mentioned earlier, which is one of the most significant barriers at small scale is in our zoning. You have to have the turbine tower set back from any of your property lines at a distance equal to the height of the tower. So if you want to get up 50 feet, 100 feet where there's some wind to be caught, you've got to be 50 feet, 100 feet from all of your property lines. So just think about that on your single-family residence. Doesn't leave a lot of space. You end up having to reduce the size of the tower, which reduces your output, which hurts your cash flow analysis. And that's why Dylan's recommending, looking primarily or at least first at some larger footprint commercial facilities where, there's a big parking lot and you can drop it in the middle of the parking lot and meet all the setbacks and get something like 100 feet or 175 feet.
All right, are there any other questions from the commission for Dylan? All right, I would like to open up the floor to any questions from the public at this time, either addressing Scott's staff report or Dylan's presentation on small-scale wind development. If you would like to address the commission about either of these topics, you are welcome to just let me know, and we'll have you come up to the table and fill out a form just saying, your name and who you are and what the nature of your question is or the nature of your discussion. So is there anybody that would like to speak? Okay.
So I was trying to understand the bottom line of where we're really coming out here. And it seems to me that we're saying that for individual homes who want to be more sustainable, that at that scale, at this time, that solar probably beats wind.
Yes.
And that, and in order to do wind in a cost-effective way, you really have to go to larger scale.
In most cases, yeah.
Yeah.
That
okay.
is the trend for sure.
Okay. And well, I mean, you gave a lot more detail, but is there anything? I guess, you know, on council, we're always thinking of what things cost relative to the benefits, and so at the moment, solar is more cost effective. Now, one of the things that you didn't mention, and that I'm always asking about, is geothermal or heat pumps for space heating and cooling. And since you did, you know, consider a few other kinds of alternatives, do you have thoughts on that?
I wouldn't be willing to go on the record in any sort of recommendation in that sort of way. I don't know the specifics of those technologies and how well they would couple with those with this sort of technology. It was just mostly a suggestion. I think there's possibilities for that, but I don't know enough about it to say whether or not that'd be a good way to go.
The attractive thing about that, I mean, it is, you know, it does save carbon. At the moment, I think the cost is not so great, although I don't know how you factor in the fact that it's always there.
You mean the wind or geothermal?
Geothermal,
Okay.
always there. You go down a certain number of feet and you've got 55 degrees Fahrenheit that you can use to cool in the summer and do a lot of heating in the winter.
Yeah.
So I'll just drop the thought in that as one is thinking of the mix, I don't know how to price the fact that it's 100% available.
Well, if you're connected to the grid, then there's not really a lot of extra value. It's just the offset value, the kilowatt hour you don't buy. It's that's what you get. If you were building an off-grid building somewhere, then that might be valuable. You know, have an additional value beyond the dollar, because the grid is always there. It's the greatest battery ever invented.
Of course, the reason the grid is always there is because there's so much fossil fuel going into the grid. So we kind of have this funny, vicious, adaptive feedback there. Okay.
Another thing to consider, you know, when you look at, say, this cash flow analysis for wind vis-a-vis solar, I don't think you say, well, solar wins, so you don't do wind, but rather you conceive of a scenario where you have a commercial site and you first maximize your solar capacity, say, on the roof, and then you still have additional demand. Then you can bring in a wind turbine that doesn't have as good of a cash flow analysis, but you've already done all the solar you can on that site. So if it beats the grid on a timeline, say 21 years, that's acceptable to you, then that's the next thing to do, I think.
Yeah.
And you know, like Dylan said, you need a bigger site so you can meet the setbacks. But I think it's more solar first, and then this is a possibility.
As for geothermal, I guess maybe that's the next project I should be working on, is seeing how feasible that is.
Well, yeah, and I would say you know, we installed geothermal. We'll never get the investment back, but we just wanted to do it. And and it's really nice. I mean, it's really just lovely. House is very comfortable. But yeah, I think that one of the things that I think that one of the things we miss in the pricing is the 100% availability. Although, as Scott says, of course, the grid is always 100% available, but it's 100% available. The dirty little secret behind that is the reason it's 100% available is because it's fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you
Yeah.
for giving me faith in the future.
Oh yeah. Hey, thanks. I appreciate that. I wish someone would give me some too.
Thank you, Councilman Jacobson. Okay.
Hi there. My name is Amanda Niebuhr, and I'm also a student at the U of I, minoring in sustainability and majoring in integrative biology. One thing that the previous speaker, Eric just said, he brought up a really important point of the subject of fossil fuel use. One question that I would have for Dylan is the amount of raw or natural resources that would have to be used in order to make a wind turbine that could be used to power 5 homes. Because if we're looking at the environmental protection and the environmental conservation, then we have to also determine whether or not the coal and the natural resources that need to be taken out of the ground is actually going to be more beneficial in wind turbine form on the ground.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's not something I necessarily considered. I guess it's because that's not often evaluated in these sorts of things. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but usually people take into account the immediate costs of a project to them rather than the social costs. I do think it's important. I don't have an answer. I don't know the numbers behind those sorts of things.
Wind and solar typically offset their own carbon emissions in very short order.
Okay.
I think that the reason why I find wind turbines to be particularly, and not necessarily ineffective, but perhaps not as effective as they could be in other places, is that often when you see wind turbines not running in the middle of cornfields in Illinois, I like to think, how long is that wind turbine going to stay around until technology advances so much that it is surpassed and no longer efficient in comparison to what's on the market now? Which is why I question why the city of Urbana would choose to spend money on a wind turbine right now relative to perhaps spending the money within the next 5 to 10 years. I'd like to challenge the idea that in the same way like flat screen TVs have gone from thousands of dollars to $100 depending on where you go, the same thing may or may not happen with wind turbines depending on where they're developed and if they're developed in areas with high wind efficiency. In the state of Illinois, I don't really necessarily see that type of technology being perfected. I don't see that being perfected here. I see that happening maybe in other areas where wind is more consistent in what Dylan was talking about. But I was also wondering if the city of Urbana, this commission, had considered the technology projection or the technology development projections and whether or not the technology may actually become cheaper within the next decade and if it'd be worth it to save the money to wait until wind turbines get better in quality.
Sure. On your first question, seeing wind turbines that are not running, there are a number of reasons that wind turbines are not running at any particular time. One reason is that, to some degree, the energy is dispatchable. Also, wind turbines are sometimes not running because they're having maintenance performed on them, which is the same for every generation source. Also, wind turbines are sometimes what's called curtailed. They're slowed down or stopped to accommodate migrating endangered species. So these are all reasons that you might see wind turbines not running at any particular time. The companies that are doing this, they're including that curtailment or off period as part of their cash flow analysis. So if it doesn't pencil out even with that, the wind turbine doesn't get built. In terms of the technology becoming obsolete, when a wind turbine that was So typically, the wind turbines are financed and developed on a 25-year timeline. So if it doesn't make sense on a 25-year timeline, it doesn't get built. A wind turbine facility that was built 25 years ago today is not going to be decommissioned. In fact, it will have enjoyed maintenance its entire life period, because it's not going to get financing if it doesn't have a maintenance plan. It doesn't have cash for maintenance included in the financing plan. A wind turbine that turns 25 today and ends its first contract period is going to get another contract period or continue to operate on the merchant market or spot market. And so it will continue to be maintained and will continue to produce electricity. I don't know what timeline some component of the wind turbine will fail and will be too costly to repair. That's not what I'm seeing. And when I talk to developers about power purchase agreements, they're talking about leasing the land beyond the first contract sales period, because they know that when their contract is up for solar or wind, the asset will still produce, and all of your costs are already paid for. They're all front loaded. So now you have an asset that's less efficient than what it used to be when it was brand new, less efficient than what you could buy on the market at that future year, but there's no additional costs. The only costs are maintenance. So they're going to continue to run it. And in terms of Urbana spending money on a wind turbine, this is a preliminary analysis. We would, for us to contemplate spending money on a wind turbine, first we'd either need to have the cash on hand, which we don't have, or we'd need a power purchase agreement. And as far as I know, there are not investors available for small-scale wind power purchase agreements. So that does not seem to be available at this time. So we would have, the only real option would be having cash on hand to make that purchase. And for a power purchase agreement with a payback period of 21 years, that's something a public sector, environmentally interested organization could contemplate. But a 21-year payback on a cash basis is more challenging. That's a more difficult decision. And of course, you have to have the cash on hand. So that's how I'm viewing this at this time.
Thank you. Those are just my remarks, my questions. I certainly think that the need and want for sustainability in this town is great, and having the U of I sustainability, or IC is also great. And as far as wind turbines goes, I don't know probably as much as you or Dylan do, but I think it's great that the commission still works towards doing stuff like that. But I just wanted to make a couple of remarks. So thank you so much, guys.
Sure.
All right, thank you for your comments. The gentleman in plaid.
So I had a couple of follow-up comments on your overall reports on...
Would you just, I'm sorry, introduce
yeah.
yourself real quick?
Sorry.
Thank you.
This third meeting today. My name is Alan Axelrod. I am a second-year PhD student in agricultural and biological engineering, and I'm a homeowner in Urbana. So the first thing is, I mentioned I'm a homeowner. Only about 25% of my residential roof is actually suitable for solar due to the presence of trees that I'd rather not have to cut down in order to do anything renewable. So I think that there is some merit to the continuation of discussion or investigation on the idea of rooftop wind. That said, the return on investment is a concern, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple things that can be talked about. One is, there's this tendency to look local for the sourcing of the material, and I completely understand that. I had recently been looking at solar on a wholesale nationwide basis and had found that there were significant savings to be had, so that, if not done, might be something that you could do to maybe improve the numbers.
Is complement it with solar
Oh, no, is to look at wholesale vendors.
that are locally?
No, nationally. That can wholesale vendors of the production capacity that can also deliver permit-ready designs that can just be handed over to a contractor. That might be an avenue to reduce cost if that wasn't looked at in the report. I think that that should be considered.
I'm sorry, and that would, how else would we get the turbines? I'm sorry, maybe I don't understand.
So my question was born out of this. I don't know what vendors you were looking at and whether or not they were wholesale or just saying, oh, we have wind in our name, so we're obviously like the best people to go to. How thorough was the market survey?
To be terribly honest, there aren't very many turbine companies that make turbines on this scale. Most of the manufacturers that I had found were not even domestic. They were mostly from China, and the reviews and professionals that I talked to that actually received turbines from these companies had very low opinions of the companies. So Berge was one there from Oklahoma, and from what I've gathered, they're the only company to really trust in terms of wind on this scale. And they manufacture and design and sell these turbines themselves. So I'm not sure if that's sort of what you mean in terms of wholesale.
Well, that sounds like a regional American vendor, and I highly encourage buying American. There might be, and as you had alluded to, there might be a lack of availability of other American vendors on a nationwide scale, so I take your point on that. The other thing is there are other ways to increase the return on investment rate that would be interesting to consider. And this is going to seem like out of left field, but let's say that you had above the average production of needed by the household for rooftop wind or any combination of renewables. One thing I've been looking into is there are these hydroponic systems that could be used. You can grow a head of lettuce in a week. And so if you have excess electricity that you aren't being compensated for, that's basically resources that you could use to produce produce that you can then either decide to consume or to sell at the farmer's market or whatever. That could be factored into at least the residential return on investment, because while that won't necessarily work for an office place, it might be feasible for residential. So that was my comment on
No, that's a very good point. And that's also why I more so suggested, rather than direct investment in turbines, maybe more just encouragement within the community, because any of us here can't really guess at the sort of capabilities that individual residents have, like what you're saying, because that is a good idea and it might work very well, but that's not something that I'm sure is capable for every resident, and not something they'd be interested in. So that's why I think providing the resources where individuals can do this on their own and they can make the best financial decision for themselves.
Yeah, understandable. Thank you. So the last bit is I'm a fan of this idea of privately subsidizing public works, and in a conversation with Bill Brown, there was the mention of the Community Foundation of Central Illinois, which, according to our discussion, had been used in the past as a crowdfunding service for providing public arts projects that wouldn't upset certain segments of the city that didn't want their tax dollars going to art projects. So this might be a way to chip at the return on investment from the city's end.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a good idea.
And then the last part does not have to do with wind in any particular thing. There was a question by one of the committee, I forget who, I'm sorry about that, where there was a remark of whether or not the school district was looking into any solar or wind or renewables. Urbana School District 116 has been looking into rooftop solar for two of their schools, one of which is MLK Elementary, which is the only reason it's the only one I can remember, as of like 2 or 3 months ago. So they're definitely, it's definitely been on their agenda, so we might see something there that can be done educationally as well. You know, if it's a program on top of an elementary school, that's the basis for having high schoolers coming over to the elementary school to learn about solar technology and some sort of applied skill set. But that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Alan, just real quick, what was the name of that foundation that you had mentioned?
This was referred to me by Bill Brown, and then I found it again on my cell phone, but Community Foundation of Central Illinois.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we do need to just do a moment of sort of housekeeping. We need to just review our 2018 meeting schedule. And then we will move into the other discussions with the I Matter resolution, Ready for 100, and the Off Fossil Fuels Act. There is no continuing business this evening.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it. We are going to be on approval for the 2018 schedule. Was that in the packet, all the dates? All right.
I move to approve it. The January 9 date works for me.
I second. And January 9th is good for me too.
Okay. Are there any issues with any other members on the January 9th meeting? Okay, so it seems like at least right now we would have a quorum so that we can go ahead and we can move that to January 9th. The motion on the floor is to approve the meeting schedule for 2018. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, that motion passes. All right. From the Off Fossil Fuels Act, we could. Do we need to? Would we need to? We've already approved the agenda. Would we need to have a motion to change the agenda at this point? It's still in the same section?
It's not an agenda, it's a sub-item,
Okay.
so I think you can just change the order.
All right. Would there be any reason not to allow the presentation to go first for the off fossil fuels? Is that okay, Lois? All right, thank you very much. And I feel the reason that we can do this is that the issues that we're discussing are all interrelated now at this point, and so we will get to the other resolutions after this, but we look forward to hearing your presentation, Lois. Lois is from the Off Fossil Fuels campaign of Food and Water Watch.
Okay, so thank you for giving me time tonight. My name's Lois Kane. I live in Urbana. I'm a local member of Food and Water Watch, and Food and Water Watch is a national nonprofit that champions healthy food and clean water for all. We stand up to corporations that put profits before people and planet and advocate for a democracy that improves people's lives and protects our environment. We are working to build a large movement with the political power to make our democratic process work, to countervail corporations buying our public policy. Food and Water Watch proudly remains independent of corporate and government influence by being fully funded through our members, individual donors, and foundation grants. When we're part of the growing global movement fighting governmental lack of will, indifference, and inaction when it comes to clean food and water issues. So I'm here tonight to tell you about the OFF Act, Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future. H.R. 3671 was introduced by Representative Tulsi Gabbard on September 1st when Harvey was spinning out in Irma and Maria. We're on their way. It had 4 co-sponsors and now has 19, 3 of which are Illinois representatives. Jan Schakowsky, Luis Gutierrez, and Danny Davis. It's the strongest and most aggressive bill introduced in Congress to date. There's a Senate bill 100 by 50. It was introduced in April, but there's been no action on that one really. The OFF Act will put us on a path towards avoiding increased climate chaos. It will place a moratorium on new fossil fuel projects and move the country to 100% renewables by 2035, with focusing on a rapid transition in the next 10 years. Evidence continues to build that the severity of the climate crisis, the latest National Climate Assessment released last month states clearly that our planet is very quickly heating up and humans are the cause. A journalist I've been following for a number of years writes a climate update every month for Truth Out. This month, Darjamel starts his dispatch with the World Meteorological Organization report that there was a record surge in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in 2016. This means that last year's increase was a stunning 50% higher than the average over the last decade. This makes global temperature targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius limits largely unattainable. Our Earth is at CO2 levels not seen for 800,000 years. James Hansen, along with 16 other scientists, published in 2016 a report saying that the 2 degrees Celsius limit that has been our upper target will be devastating for our coastal communities because of ice melt and sea level rise. We are quickly running out of time. While the resistance to Trump's foolish and dangerous agenda has been strong and growing, we must do more by propelling a bold agenda for addressing the climate crisis. We cannot allow ourselves to be sidetracked by false choices between lesser evil fossil fuels, but instead must demand a ban on fracking and strong policies that keep all fossil fuels in the ground. We must push for government policies that promote renewable energy and energy efficiency and that protect our communities while creating hundreds of thousands of good jobs in the renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors. This agenda must center on racial and economic justice and cannot rely on false market solutions like carbon trading and taxing programs, which are corporate pay-to-pollute schemes. We need a World War II scale mobilization to get our country onto a quick and just transition off fossil fuels and into 100% renewable energy. The OFF Act places a moratorium on new fossil fuel projects, bans the export of oil and gas, moves our automobile and rail systems to 100% renewable energy, provides for a just transition for environmental justice communities and those working in the fossil fuel industry. It establishes an equitable transition fund and workforce development center, all paid for by closing an offshore tax loophole and repealing federal tax breaks for the fossil fuel industry. So no more subsidies for killing our planet. We must mobilize to build support for this bill, though the prospects of passing anything in Congress right now are grim. Moving members of Congress to support the OFF Act and elevating its profile are important for 3 reasons. 1, create political consensus that rapid transition to 100% renewable energy now. So 6 years ago, fracked gas was considered an environmentally friendly bridge fuel, with lots of supports for regulation but little talk of banning it. Hundreds of organizations and thousands of people came together around the issue and held their elected officials accountable. New York and Maryland have since banned fracking, and Representative Mark Pocan introduced legislation to ban it on federal lands. Bernie Sanders took up the issue in the 26th presidential race, and a majority of Americans now support a ban. It took lots of hard work, but the political consensus has shifted, and we must do the same now with the urgent need to act on climate change. It makes OFF a top issue now, even though Congress is controlled by pro-fossil fuel ideologues. It is still critical that we work to get members to sponsor the bill now. If we organize to get large numbers of co-sponsors on the OFF Act, it will become a top issue that representatives will need to respond to. The OFF Act already enjoys support from more than 100 organizations, including a wide range of major national groups like National Nurses United, Progressive Democrats of America, Climate Justice Alliance, Indigenous Environment Network, and People's Action. And also to make space for state and local actions. At the same time, we are working to build support for the OFF Act. There are also campaigns across the country working to move cities, counties, and states to 100% renewable energy now. Organizing around these local efforts can and should dovetail with efforts to pressure members of Congress to co-sponsor federal legislation. Passing local measures or getting state and local elected officials to sign the OFF pledge will help build the political power needed to push Congress to support the federal legislation. Similarly, getting more co-sponsors on federal legislation to stop fossil fuel projects will open up more space for state and local action. These efforts all work together. Winning the fight to move off fossil fuels will not be easy, as the thousands of people who are working to stop pipelines, ban fracking, and build renewable energy projects can tell you. But these are also fights that we can and must win if we are to protect people and planet and avoid the very worst climate chaos. The OFF Act is a critical first step in what must be a major national mobilization to restructure our energy system now. And I don't know if you all were aware of the Climate Realities 24 Hours of Reality that just ran for the last 24 hours. It's Al Gore's organization. It was pretty cool to watch. Actually, you know, for people who may not think there's very much hope, all of a sudden you watch something like this and like, it's pretty cool. It's happening just all around the world. So just to put that out there. So any questions for, if I can answer them, I will.
Yeah.
Morgan? I have a, I guess a comment. So, you know, we just looked at this cost of wind, and on campus we're talking about the cost of, you know, additional solar, and, you know, we're investigating geothermal, and we're looking at all these costs and payback projects. You know, the energy performance contract for the city is looking at, you know, when do we get this paid off, and all of those are dependent on what we pay for power now. And, you know, I just find it very interesting that those of us who are trying to make these changes towards the renewable energy are having to argue in support of clean energy when against the what we pay now. But the what we pay now is subsidized. You know, it's got all these subsidies supporting and the nuclear plants in our state, the fossil fuels through various programs. I don't even know if we could figure out what it actually costs us. You know, the 8 cents in what Dylan's report said didn't include the tax subsidies that are keeping that price at, you know, low for us. So I'm curious, do you know any numbers related to the subsidies? I've always known they were there. I just don't know anything about what they are.
In the bill itself, again, this all hinges on basically this bill passing, and subsidies for the whole fossil fuel industry ends as of December 31st, 2018. You know, so boom. In the bill, under the findings, they have in here that the Environmental Law Institute found, I don't know if this is going to answer your question or not, but the Environmental Law Institute found that from 2002 through 2008, federal fossil fuel subsidies in the United States totaled $72 billion, while federal renewable energy investments totaled $12 billion. So how do you compete with that? You know, according to the group Taxpayers for Common Sense, 5 largest oil corporations made more than $1 trillion in profits during the last, you know, decade. I mean, that's just obscene while they're destroying the planet. According to the Center for American Progress, 5 largest oil corporations posted more than $89.7 billion profits in 2014 alone. Plus, they keep getting our keep getting our tax dollars on top of all that, all their profit. And then the Center for Responsive Politics, oil and gas, coal, utility, and other natural resource extraction industries spent more than $1.8 billion on lobbying. So the idea is, you know, we just have to stop this. And the way that all of this would be taken care of is like all the money that goes to the fossil fuel industry would now go into ramping up the whole, clean energy, everything. So, but as in terms of like really answering your question, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Just that the idea is that somehow we got to find the way to do this, or else, we're in trouble.
Another way to change the accounting, as I think you're alluding to, would be to include the social cost of carbon in the price of fossil fuel energy, as if you paid that. We don't pay it. It's externalized. Someone else pays it. We don't pay it on our gas or electric bill. But if we said, well, what would that be if we did pay it? And then say, now how does solar and wind compare? That's one way you could value that, as you're suggesting.
I was wondering if your group had considered the impact on the social justice for the lower income groups who, once the tax subsidies end, that means all their power bills and everything is much higher. And how will that balance out? I mean, obviously climate change is an important topic, but how will that impact those folks?
Again, you're talking about, what the bill is talking about is the fossil fuel subsidies would end, and in the communities, low-income communities, area of low income, high unemployment, high rent burden, low level of home ownership. The idea is that these communities would be brought into the whole new, fossil fuel free economy, and with what the bill is talking about is it all gets poured into like World War II. Like all of a sudden we created all these airplanes, and so basically that would just be poured into renewable energy and putting people to work that way. That's what the bill is talking about. I mean, it sounds like a fantasy, I know, but it's pretty far-reaching. But what seems to be out there, a lot of latest reports and studies just say we only have like 20 years before we really do hit the point of real serious tipping points. So.
Has your group also thought about the education campaign to help folks who might lose their job and then need to be retrained, and how will that happen? Because there's folks in towns whose major income comes from fossil fuel generation, and they love the company because it supports their town. And how will that affect the community?
Well, when it comes to coal, people may love the companies, but coal is on its way out. It's dirty. People get very sick from it, all the way around. There's the Equitable Transition Fund and Workforce Development Center, part of this bill, that basically just takes all that into account. And again, it just seems like it's just this huge, massive, how do we do this? But this bill brings in those types of communities into a fund that goes into retraining, into helping these communities that have been hurt by fossil fuel industries, and retraining and getting them back into the workforce with these kinds of clean energy technologies. So.
I just have one more comment that I just wanted to make sure that this has been well thought out, because in the past a few things have seemed well thought out and then people end up on welfare for the rest of their lives, and that's not good for society. So,
well, the bill was worked on, Tulsi Gabbard, with various organizations, with input from, I don't know I don't know everyone who had input into the bill, but the idea is we just got to somehow get this going. We got to get Congress to move on this. And the idea that climate change and the warming planet is something really serious. And we all just have to come together. And if this is like the most aggressive bill so far that's been introduced, at least it's a start to maybe just get the wheels spinning here that this is serious. And that's even if this doesn't pass, maybe somehow it can just start getting more awareness as to how serious the problem really is.
Beth, if I remember correctly, the subsidies were 72 million, but the profit was 1.2 billion. So to cut the subsidies doesn't mean that the companies have to close or have to lay off employees. It would mean that they wouldn't have as much profit off of the taxpayers, right? And that doesn't mean that they won't choose to close in order to keep their cash. And actually, I'm interested in, has there been an analysis or an estimate about, will some of the power companies close because of lack of subsidies? Has that been looked into?
I have no idea. I can try to find that out. But the idea is to shut them down in a way anyway. It's just to shut down the whole fossil fuel industry. And so,
right. But if we shut it down right now, we'd have several people without power.
Oh, and actually, but that's what the bill is talking about, a transition.
Mm-hmm.
So really you're talking about an 80% by 2027, and then the rest of it by 2035. So, I mean, the bill completely understands there's no way you could, even if you could shut it down tomorrow, you can't, because the world runs on this stuff. So.
Okay, so in the packet of information that we received prior to the meeting, one of the documents was the Off Fossil Fuels Elected Official Pledge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this body, the Sustainability Advisory Commission, is an advisory commission appointed by the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody on this body is an elected official, so none of us could or be authorized, since it says, are you authorized to sign
Mm-hmm.
this? None of us would be authorized to sort of take this pledge. So I am looking for sort of some more information from you, or some more just, was there a specific action that you are looking for that the Off Fossil Fuels campaign has for local sort of non-elected bodies of government, or what next steps are you looking for?
The Off Fossil Fuels campaign is basically it's elected officials right now because they would have the power to bring more influence on state legislatures, and say Scott Bennett and Carol Ammons, our elected officials, state officials. The package you got, basically, I at the city council meeting a couple of weeks ago gave that to them, and then I just gave it to you so you could see what the whole campaign was about. So it's basically there's a citizen petition that we circulate to get people on the street to sign it, that then can go to our elected officials or our city councils or county governments to show that the people on the streets are for this. And then the next step up would be local officials that were elected that say, yes, we're complete, we're behind this. You can see a few in Illinois right now have signed it, up to City of Urbana, a resolution saying we're behind it, that would then go to state legislature to say Urbana's behind this, to encourage Illinois. Everything you guys are doing in the state of Illinois, Illinois really is doing a good job. I was trying to find some numbers and Illinois was like 4th in the list for doing sustainable energy, and or 7th, one or the other, I forget now. But it's the whole integrated campaign all the way up to, our Congress, to just everyone, we're all in this together, from citizens up to local officials to state legislatures to the Congress. So that's the campaign. And it's all interlocking and encouraging, like, every part of the government and, to get in there.
And one follow-up question is, have you had members of the Urbana or kind of Champaign County public sign petitions so
No,
far?
I spoke with Senator Bennett, and he was completely on board, and we had a really good conversation, but he wasn't really quite ready to sign it yet, because there's in the pledge, there's a line about not supporting any fossil fuel, that kind of thing. So, but it was a very good conversation, and maybe the more citizens who sign the petition, and maybe the more that the city of Urbana talks about getting off fossil fuels in the resolution that maybe could come from you, it would encourage him to see that more and more people in his district are behind this, and, it might be more apt to sign it. I haven't had a chance to talk with Representative Ammons yet.
Oh, and my question more to just members of the public who have signed a petition to try and move the elected officials in that direction. Have you been collecting signatures from?
Yeah, actually, I was out at a few events, and I've given from Champaign, Urbana, Savoy, surrounding areas. I have about 65 signatures that have been turned into Food and Water Watch. So.
Okay, great. I would entertain any proposals or motions from the commission on any actions or recommendations to take regarding the Off Fossil Fuels campaign at this time.
I'll stop short of a proposal right now, but just, one thing could be, I won't stop short of a proposal. We could do further discussion on the, after looking more in detail at the bill itself, into whether, and just have some discussion on whether this is a thing that we would recommend that the council and the mayor take up, whether it's something that we recommend the city supporting. So that would be one proposal, that we take this up as an agenda item for discussion.
And that's pretty much why I'm here tonight. It's just to get this, the act itself. I don't think people even know that there has been an act, proposed in Congress that does this. So I just think just the idea of getting more awareness out there about it and support for it in whatever way is, just a way to get the topic really rolling more and more.
To just follow up, are you proposing to have this as a continuing business item on the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second that.
All right. So there has been a second to propose further discussion pending further individual study. I guess I'm sort of wondering if we're just kicking this off to the January meeting. Do we want to have any further presentation at the next meeting?
Well,
Or-
okay. I can't speak for anybody else. I haven't looked at the details of the bill. I looked at some of the short format materials that came along and heard the presentation, but I don't know what's in the bill, and I guess I'd prefer to have a chance to study that bill and see what's in it, before dismissing it or supporting it.
Okay, is there any further discussion or debate on the proposal? Okay, all in favor of having the off fossil fuels bill be discussed further at the next meeting, all in favor for that, say aye.
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 Any opposed? No? Okay, so that passes. Thank you so much for your presentation this evening. It sounds like we'll be discussing this in our January meeting.
Okay. And
So,
I'll do
thank
my
you.
best to track down some answers to some questions, and from Food and Water Watch itself, from the policy geeks with Food and Water Watch. So, okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Is it easy enough to find the bill?
I think I put a link into.
Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what I thought. Just
Okay, the next item on our agenda this evening is a discussion about the iMatter resolution and the Sierra Club's Ready for 100 campaign. Let me see. We have okay, so I might be looking for some clarification from iMatter and the Ready for 100 campaign, and even possibly from Lois. I have before me the Urbana Climate Inheritance Resolution that I believe was shared by iMatter. There was a second resolution in the packet that states City of Urbana calling for 100% renewable energy. I'm going to handle both of those resolutions separately, but I do apologize. I'm trying to figure out which campaign the City of Urbana calling for 100% renewable energy resolution belongs to, or if that was something that staff created. Or okay.
I think that goes with Ready for 100. If you want to hold it up, maybe someone in the audience will comment.
Was there anyone here this evening from the Ready for 100? I know that Michael couldn't make it tonight due to class.
I think that goes along with Ready for 100.
Okay. All right. So we will handle that separately. All right. So with regard to the resolution, I believe that it would be correct if we had a motion that we can debate or discuss the resolution, or we could have further discussion on the resolution and the iMatter campaign. What would you all like to do with this? Morgan.
I would like to try to incorporate these goals into the next Urbana Climate Action Plan. And I don't know, I don't know much about city resolutions. So I don't know how a resolution, because I think this is designed for the council. This draft resolution that iMatter prepared is, it's in order for the city council to sign. Correct?
That would be
our
correct. Okay,
understanding?
right. So that would be correct. So this evening we're able to discuss the resolution and then make a recommendation to the council, whether that be to consider the resolution for adoption or not, just depending on what the commission, what the body decides this evening. As just a small recap, we've had iMatter students come and present on 2 or 3 occasions to the Sustainability Advisory Commission. And then they also presented the report card to the city council. The city council recommended that the SAC discuss the resolution And so here we are. I know that there has been support from Councilmember Jacobson to explore ways that our community can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels in order to sort of protect the climate going forward. And so here we are this evening discussing the resolution and what we can do, what we should do to what we should recommend to the City Council.
So last time when we talked about the iMatter resolution, there was some of the discussion was, so there was one of the articles in the resolution was that the city should commit to generating 100% renewable energy. There were a number of things that were, I think, on a technical grounds. Just in terms of the language and the way that it's written, there was some ambiguity, but also, I think substantively there were elements that I think we would need to have iMatter. I think maybe we would need to have a back and forth with iMatter talking about the resolution, the elements of it, and I mean, my sense of the discussion that we had last time was that we were not in agreement with everything that was in the resolution, and I didn't get a sense that there was a majority of us that were willing to stand up then and say, I support this right now. I would like to see, and I guess there was another issue of the interest in youth participation. We've all had interest in youth participation. We have tried, and not to say that it won't work, because we've tried a couple of different times and nothing has stuck. But I think we could use some sustained engagement by the iMatter people, whether it's some offline discussion with, a sub, whatever with a small group, to work on
Like a liaison.
something to I think to draft something that is closer to what we could agree on, or if they're going to be in here, and I just think it needs some follow up and a little bit more sustained engagement with that group. So that's my take.
One note, iMatter did make an amendment to clarify communities' electricity from renewable sources by 2025, to clarify the distinction between city facilities and operations on the one hand and the entire community on the other.
Okay.
In the resolution.
So I thought one of the other sort of sticking points last time we talked about this had to do with conflicts between what the city has said they would do in the climate action plan, or what the city has said they would work towards, and the timelines that are implied in the resolution here. Are there legal implications? I mean, council has approved the climate action plan, which has a certain set of timelines and goals. Could they approve something that conflicts with something they had approved previously, or?
There's no legal implications. A plan is a plan. A resolution is a statement of support. They all could be categorized as non-binding policy. They're direction to staff, but they aren't ordinances. Only an ordinance is legally binding.
Okay, so it doesn't, I guess it only matters in terms of the appearance of that inconsistency. Is the climate action plan something that we amend for something like this?
That hasn't been the practice. There are other comprehensive plans, like, for instance, the Bicycle Master Plan, which is updated every few years. We can do that. I think it would be okay for if person so desired for City Council to pass a new resolution that sets a different goal than what's in the Climate Action Plan, and just let both of them exist. And it would be clear that the latest or newest would supersede insofar as there is a conflict. I think that's okay too. Our Climate Action Plan terms out in 2020. So I think all the above are fine to proceed.
So what's the plan kickoff for the next climate action plan? Is it like next year or the year after?
2019?
2019, okay. So we have a little bit of time.
2019 and a half?
Yeah. This is not a multi-year planning process?
No.
Okay.
It was 6 months. Meaning 6 SAC meetings.
Okay, so it sounds like if we think this is a good idea and the goals are worth pursuing, that the fact that it isn't necessarily consistent with the climate action plan is not something that would stop us or could stop.
I wouldn't recommend against it for that reason alone. I may get direction from leadership to in fact amend the climate action plan, or not, or others or leadership may be comfortable with having just an updated goal that supersedes the goal in the older document.
Okay.
I think there's still the fact that we have a climate action plan with pretty aggressive goals by most standards, and so I would love more aggressive standards if we could meet them, but we have, I think we still are, like many communities, struggling to figure out how we are going to meet the goals that we have in a cost-effective way. And so, entertaining the idea of modifying the targets is fine. The benefit of doing that without, I don't know, any more confidence in how we're going to realize those goals, like I'm not sold on that.
Well, and that's why I was thinking to try to incorporate it in the climate action plan, because there's I assume I wasn't involved the last time Urbana did one, but there's a process involved in that planning that shares information about what we're trying to do, how we're gonna, how we believe we can accomplish it. And 80% reduction in community emissions by 2050 is what's in the plan, right? 2050. So, 100% instead of 80%, and 10 years earlier, when we have achieved a lot. We're not on target to reach that right now, is what concerns me. But at the same time, and this is what I did before, I know on both sides of the story, but at the same time, this is getting the council to commit to try. So if we say we're going to work towards it, we're going to think, we're going to commit to working on it. And we need that in order to get things like the OFF Act signed and passed, right? Some of those systemic changes that if we just pay for, if we're only going to do things that have a payback, we're never going to get there unless we start counting the social cost of carbon, which is basically giving ourselves a carbon tax or something to that effect. So I'm really torn about it. I don't know what I personally think.
I guess, to your thought about the, the planning process, and I think also to what Dustin was saying. So there's, we could imagine a longer planning process for the next iteration of the climate action plan. And so one possibility could be, say, looking at the targets that have been recommended by iMatter as something to shoot for in this next iteration, and maybe we can begin the planning process sooner rather than later, while still working on the implementation of the current plan. I don't know how mind-bending that is, but that's, that could be one in-between path.
Sorry. It's okay. Just going back to the terminology, this says work toward generating 100% of the community's electricity from renewable sources by 2025. And just, it's a technicality, but generating would be generating all of the power in our community, right?
I don't think that was the intention. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think they just mean 100% of the
Using-
generation, wherever it may be, is 100% renewable.
Renewable. So renewable energy certificates in the amount of our total electricity would qualify.
I presume so.
And the municipal aggregation program is a lot of that already. I don't remember how much.
I forget, but it's, it's municipal electric aggregation is 1/2 of the, it's the electricity of the residential sector.
So just the residential.
So it doesn't include any gas, it doesn't include commercial electricity, it doesn't include cars.
This says electricity.
Hmm?
This is, just looking at the line, it's electricity.
Yeah, you're right. But in terms of the community as a whole.
Okay, thanks.
Would that be a clarifying question that you would like to ask iMatter? We can call them up.
Oh, yes.
Rebecca, would you please join us? Okay, so we're currently discussing the section that says, be it further resolved that the city of Urbana actively work toward generating 100% of the community's electricity from renewable sources by 2025. And Morgan has just brought up the point that the term generating could have meant or could mean that the city is generating its own energy. And Scott stated that perhaps that the intent was more that as long as we're getting our energy from 100% renewable sources, that would meet the requirement. And then also on the word electricity, we're curious about clarifying if electricity means just electricity or if that also means energy or embodies energy as well. And if yes, so.
Yeah, I'm Rebecca Lauren, and Scott's interpretation was correct. We did mean that renewable certificates would count towards renewable energy. And as far as electricity, we did just intend that to be electricity.
Okay.
Rebecca, do you want to talk about some of the strategizing that we had in a meeting earlier this week?
It was last Thursday.
I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, so a few of the iMatter students met with Scott and Stacy and Councilman Jacobson, and then a couple other community organizations, people from Ready for 100, and Lois from from Food and Water Watch, to talk about this resolution and some of these goals and how we might get there. We came up with a few ideas of more steps that we could take. Should I talk about those also? Okay, you gotta remember them. We had talked about implementing a sustainability tax of some kind to fund these efforts. as an additional source of funding that we don't currently have. We also talked about municipalizing electric aggregation utility. I don't remember if I'm forgetting anything. Sorry.
It was working with state bid to get electric vehicles on the state bid contract.
Yes.
So this is why I think that incorporating it into the next Urbana Climate Action Plan, where and I guess sort of repeating what Todd said about getting the planning process started earlier and getting some actions in the plan that allow us to actually try to make those kinds of things happen. That and other examples, there's a discussion about, or there's the beginnings of conversations on campus about trying to get regional offsets, like local based offset programs, paying to plant forests or whatever in our county or in the central Illinois or something to that effect. And so some of those things that could actually have pathways towards achieving these goals, that there could be an analysis of what is the impact on the local community, both in terms of the reduction in emissions from here and in terms of the impacts to them financially, immediately and with the social cost of carbon both included, and health impacts and lifestyle impacts.
Scott, do you can you tell? I don't have the climate action plan open in front of me, but this 80% by 2050, is that, what exactly is that? Is that 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, or is it 80% of our electricity comes from renewable sources? Because it sounds like we might be talking about two different things.
With the climate inheritance resolution, I believe, asks for both. It has a sort of an interim renewable electricity goal, and then a final greenhouse gas goal, or carbon neutral goal, in fact. The Urbana Climate Action Plan calls for a 25% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2020 and an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050, both of those for the community as a whole.
Okay. And I thought when we were discussing this last time, how those numbers, because I wasn't on the commission at that point, but the way that those numbers were arrived at weren't necessarily based on a detailed analysis of how the city could actually meet. They're kind of arbitrary, like let's set a goal that seems somewhat stringent but ambitious and we'll go with it. So to the comment that, we need to think about setting a goal now that is, something we can only achieve by very, very clear strategies and approaches, seems like a different tact that I don't know necessarily makes sense if we're trying to send a message that this is something we support and we think it's a good idea. We can always kind of equivocate and say, well, I don't know how we're going to get there. I mean, is it going to be 90% by 2035? I mean, these things we can always throw these kind of numbers around. So I don't know. I think it'd be great to have a planning process where we can have the level of detail and analysis to say, yes, we can do all these steps and we're going to get there by, some year, whatever it is, and everything's going to be great. But I just don't know that the planning process is going to give us that assurance. So I don't know. Maybe it doesn't make a huge difference that we don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but the message that we send by agreeing to this number that there's a constituency that's advocating for it, maybe makes sense. I don't know.
I think your characterization is correct. I inherited the first phase, phase 1 of the Climate Action Plan, and it set goals that my understanding were selected between staff and the Sustainability Advisory Commission at the time. And the actions and plans laid out in that phase 1 did not, so to speak, add up to 25% and 80%. In fact, the plan called for 2 years of study, or a year of study, to develop a second phase that would propose additional goals. And actually, Todd, you were here at that time, right?
Yeah, I was
Is
here,
that
and we
correct? Is
did
that-
we did look at. So at that time, there was a lot less information available on what kinds of different measures. So we had huge lists of measures, and frankly, it was overwhelming at the number of measures and the very small proportional impact that a lot of those measures had. And so it was, the municipal aggregation was a thing that was on the horizon, and so it was an early attempt with less information than we have right now. At the moment, we have more information. We are now past the municipal aggregation for residential, where we've seen the impact of that, which is what was on the order of 20% or 25%. So now, if we're looking at another planning process, we have some big slices that we can look at. So I think the next biggest slices that we would look at commercial electricity is a big one. Of course, there's the residential gas and the commercial natural gas, and there's the fossil fuels. And so in the fossil fuels, we can break that into transportation, and then there's some proportion of that is, which I think could be an interesting one because it's very, very dirty, which is the small engines, the lawnmowers. And there's some interesting research coming out that the proportion of consumption and emissions from the small engines, the chainsaws and lawnmowers and those kinds of things, is larger, is more significant than you think. So, anyways, those are as I see it, some of the big slices. And as we've looked at the success of the municipal aggregation in the solar program, seems like, is there municipal aggregation for the commercial sector? I know that's been something a little bit different. It's something that would be more, I don't know if it'd be more difficult, but those are the next pieces that we have to tackle. And Stacy and I were talking one time, and she's like, "Well, what do we do about the gas?" You can't really offset gas. And so, looking at, well, what are the strategies for getting off of gas? And so we heard mention of, geothermal. In our homes and in our buildings, we use gas primarily for space heating and for water heating. And so anyway, there's some technology substitution. Anyway, I'm going on.
No, I also just read, so just to the gas point really quick, and then I want to get back to the resolution, since the resolution doesn't actually mention gas or gas-powered motors, the small engines. ComEd is looking for input now from stakeholders to develop a program for getting people to use more high-efficient, sorry, totally drawing a blank, but the high-efficiency heat pumps to get them off of natural gas, and I just saw that come across my email. So I think it's really interesting that at least one very large utility in the state of Illinois is exploring an incentive program to switch their I don't know if it will involve directly switching their customers from natural gas to high-efficiency heat pumps, or if it's to try and encourage the use of already purely electric heat owners. to switch to heat pumps, but they're looking for that feedback. And there's always that opportunity to sort of pressure Ameren to also consider those types of programs. But anyway, so like, I think that's interesting. Like, that's coming from a really large utility in Illinois. So perhaps we're not so far off from being able to see how we can realistically switch our heating systems from natural gas over to an electric system that can be supported by renewables, as just one thing. I would like to just sort of go back to the resolution. Do any of the commission members have any further questions for Rebecca at this time? Okay. The way that I see this is that never mind. I'll stay there. I think I am looking for any sort of proposal or motion from a member of the commission on a path forward with what to do with this and what sort of message we would like to send to the commission when right now may be the time to be making bold statements about climate change in a country where sort of federally the conversation is halted, but the conversation is being continued on regional and local scales. So I think that right now there is an opportunity for us to be saying something about that and about our commitments towards reducing our climate impact.
So I just want to say that actually Dustin's comment about knowing the path forward, it really helps me feel better about this resolution. Because I think your point's well taken that the Urbana plan right now doesn't really have a vision for how to do it. And one of the things that we talked about this, I think it was with the iMatter, but maybe it was a previous conversation at an earlier meeting, is we really need that that engagement, that public discussion and the movement. We need the people in order for these things to change. You know, the UC Solar program had almost no, not none, but almost no commercial businesses that added solar. Even though there was this great opportunity and all kinds of buzz, they didn't do it. And if we have, if through signing this, we also actually find a way to get the youth more actively involved, walking into businesses and saying, why don't you have solar? Where's your recycling bin? What's going on here? What's wrong with you? I think I can support it.
Would it be appropriate for me to make a comment on what I think would be helpful to come to council? Or is that out of line?
Yes, you may. Thank you. And Rebecca, thank you so much.
So I would just say that the council was, I think in general, very receptive to the student presentation, and definitely got me into a new discomfort zone. I think that it would really be extremely useful if we could get from you all who are really focused on this, whereas we're focused on a million different things, plus this, both a statement that, yeah, you really want us to be more aggressive than we have been, that your judgment is that, and I'm getting a sense that that is how you feel. I mean, mostly I wanted tonight to listen. And also, if you make suggestions to us about specific things that we ought to consider doing, that might be explicit steps, you know, that would be so useful. So I guess I would hope that you would bring that forward, and I'm just one person, but I'll tell you that I will, you know, I want to push this, you know, on the council pretty hard to the best of my ability.
Some of our discussion was, you know, we operate in a no-cost context. There's no funding for the Climate Action Plan. And we've taken that pretty far, but it won't scale to 100%. Additional funding would be required, and that's a lot of what our discussion was last week. And so that's, you know, if a funding source is conceivable on some time scale, then, you know, scaling up the climate pollution reductions is conceivable.
Yeah, I mean, I can just share with you a couple of things that I brought up in that, because we're always very, very mindful of falling into a tax burden disadvantage with Champaign, because, you know, people have a choice as to where to live, where to do business. So one of the things, actually, this was Scott's idea. I mean, number one, with existing revenue, we're not going to get to 100%. Because there are things that we need to invest in. So this is the dreaded T word, a sustainability tax. But we happen to know that when the kids go to Champaign's going to get a D, whereas we got a C+. So maybe there might be some, you know, prestige thing. So what we might think about doing is a sustainability tax to take effect, triggered to take effect, if Champaign will match it. Or maybe at a modest level, but go up to a higher level if Champaign will match that, or whatever. I don't know. You know, we'd have to go into the sausage factory that makes ordinances. But if you know, formally ask us to consider the various possibilities, the various mechanisms, we will have to do that, and we will do that. And I think only good things would come out of that. Nothing bad would come out of that. So you know, I think the youngsters have challenged us to do better. I think that is really very appropriate, and I would really love for you all to be a conduit to push that challenge back up to the council from your combined, you know, deep concern for the environment and your experience in considering these issues.
All right, thank you very much for that perspective.
That helps.
Great. All right, is there a motion for a recommendation on the Urbana Climate Inheritance Resolution? Oh, I'm sorry, you were clearing your throat. I didn't know if I got something wrong.
Is that related to iMatter? I'm sorry, I'm not clear about.
It is. We're discussing the Urbana Climate Inheritance Resolution, which was the language that was provided by I Matter. Mm-hmm.
You know, given the comments from Eric Jacobson, I mean, I like the idea of having explicit steps to recommend. I actually, you know, I think that's really important. It's also nice to hear that the council is supportive, and I could see that from, you know, reading the council minutes on the, but you know, those explicit steps also come with I think an important piece which has begun with some of the feedback that we've gotten is the stakeholder process, and you know, I imagine, you know, we could come up with a couple of recommendations right now, but you know, I mean, I don't want to I guess I don't want to sound like just, you know, pitching it off to the next meeting, but you know, I guess I think that I would like to see that we continue and grow a stakeholder process and the planning process for the next you know, for the next climate action plan, and looking at harmonizing the climate action plan with the goals of the I'm forgetting the name of the resolution, the climate inheritance. So looking at how, you know, I think we have a planning process that looks at how we harmonize with that, and I guess I would hope for support for a robust stakeholder process, because it's difficult to come up with all of the strategies and the specific measures, and even I think what we might ask of council. I don't know. I'm struggling to to finish the statement here.
I would agree that it would be interesting to hear more of the iMatters input into the strategy. So possibly there could be another, you know, subcommittee meeting with iMatter and Scott and Councilwoman and Chairwoman to talk about strategies, and then come back to the January meeting and give a presentation.
Is it important to the council members that the strategy meetings or strategies are more formalized before recommending to the council to adopt a resolution around generating about the future, working toward the future of generating 100% of community electricity by renewable sources, or to sort of work towards creating a mechanism for the ongoing inclusion of young people in the process, or et cetera? Is it important that that meeting occurs beforehand?
No.
I don't think so, because it's going to be such a long process getting to there that we won't be able to do it in a month. So I think that can be a separate activity.
Okay. With that, is there a motion towards a recommendation?
So I'll move to that we that we issue a recommendation to the council to support to support the climate inheritance, and that the commission will begin to work with council and community stakeholders on a process for developing a plan that moves towards those goals.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Thank you. Okay, is there any debate or discussion on the motion? All right, I'm wondering if you would be willing to, sorry, Todd, I'm just wondering about the second part of your statement, where you're saying that we would work as a commission to begin to work towards community stakeholder group. I guess we do still have a discussion item under new business as discussion on outreach to environmental organizations and local stakeholder groups to develop new lines of activity. I'm wondering if it would be just more appropriate to have a sort of second motion on that aspect where we can discuss that aspect going forward, and we can keep this motion to just the support of the climate inheritance plan.
Well, I thought he was talking about getting council support of wide stakeholder engagement, which is going to include the need for funding support to do wide stakeholder engagement for the integration with the climate action plan. So I think that's a little different than the community engagement.
I can reread it.
Sure, yeah.
Todd Rusk moves to issue recommendation to council to support climate inheritance, and the commission will begin to work with council and community stakeholders on developing a plan that moves toward that goal. So it's specific towards the climate inheritance resolution.
It is related to the to that next item on the agenda, and I guess I felt like it was important to specifically call that out because without the stakeholder engagement, I just don't see much hope for success. Now, whether there's a preference to strike that and do it separately, that's anyway. That was my reason for including it there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like what we're doing is we're setting a target and then we're figuring out, or we're stating that we're going to have a process to figure out how we get to that target. That process being updating the next, or coming up with the next climate action plan. It sounds like, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Or we're not talking about multiple processes to figure out various strategies to achieve these things, which are kind of, we should have one end target that we're aiming for that gets encapsulated into the next climate action plan. That would, I don't know, I'm more familiar with comprehensive planning processes, though I don't know what kind of process was undertaken for the climate action plan, if it resembled something like that, or, yeah, so I don't know what kind of funding would be necessary and how extensive, outreach was, but it would be great to have that kind of process if we can. It just depends on the availability of funds, I suppose.
There would be a couple $1,000s in, printing costs that can be covered.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of supporting the resolution, which in a sense sets this ambitious target, and then saying that we're going to have some sort of process that comes up with, you know, a comprehensive or a coordinated approach for how we get there, as opposed to just starting to suggest one-off strategies to council to say, oh, this is a good idea, or, you know, that's a good idea. Because I don't think that's the way forward. I think, you know, any one strategy or approach has, you know, they have unintended consequences, and, you know, sustainability tax could be regressive and, you know, impact the low-income groups in the community more than higher-income groups, which wouldn't necessarily be the intent of that. But that's, you know, a risk, I think, when we start just saying, you know, cherry-picking good ideas here and there, as opposed to thinking through how each of these things would work together to get us toward this goal, which I think would involve, you know, a process, something longer than sitting in a meeting and listing off ideas. That's my.
Okay. Is there any other debate or discussion on the motion?
So I'm wondering if there's an interest in revising the language of the motion based on what everyone has said.
That would be up to your seconder, I think.
I guess I didn't see the second part of what Todd said to be included in the original motion as much in seconding that, so I would like to support bringing the inheritance plan to council and having them consider it. I don't know. I mean, it would be nice to have a plan, but it seems like that will be a long-term process, and I don't know, maybe not something that we can fully decide on at this time.
Yeah, it seems like the devil really is going to be in the details on this.
Yes.
So I guess I'm not really sure. Can you please just read the motion one more time?
Todd Rusk moves to issue recommendation to council to support climate inheritance, and the commission will begin to work with council and community stakeholders on developing a plan that moves toward that goal.
Can we move to change the language of his motion to just support the climate action, the inheritance plan?
I think that Todd was asking if we should change it, and so you should
Yes.
ask
Oh.
Todd to restate it in a different way
Okay.
and see what he
Sorry.
says.
So I move that we encourage council to support the climate inheritance plan, and that the commission and council engage in a process to realize those goals. Period.
Maybe climate inheritance resolution rather than climate inheritance plan.
Yes, climate inheritance
Yeah, that's what you
resolution.
meant. I'm sorry, I don't know what
I don't.
to
Is
say.
there still a? Is there a?
A second.
All right. What I think we're going to go ahead and do is that we're going to vote on the motion to move to support the climate inheritance resolution and to... It's that second part, Todd. I'm sorry.
He said, and for the commission and council to work to develop a plan to accomplish those goals.
Great. So that is the motion that we are voting on. All in favor of that motion as amended, say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. All right. That motion carries. So I think we are pleased to say that we will be recommending that the Urbana City Council will consider adopting the Urbana Climate Inheritance Resolution brought forth by iMatter. iMatter, thank you for your work in and dedication towards ensuring a better future for the inhabitants of our community. So thank you very much. I hate to do this. There is a second resolution that was included in our packet. This is called the City of Urbana Calling for 100% Renewable Energy. I am not going to read all of the whereases, but this one states, now therefore it be resolved, so recommending that the City of Urbana would urge the state of Illinois to establish a renewable portfolio standard, or an RPS, with a goal of 100% renewable energy and transportation by 2035, and to halt all new fossil fuel energy projects in the state. And then further goes on to describe sort of some of the how they would get there, and how to include the community, and especially to address issues for community members that would be most affected by any sort of new policies or infrastructure that could impact them. So also resolving transitioning to 100% clean energy system, working towards transitioning workers from jobs in the fossil fuel industry to living wage union jobs that support energy efficiency and the development of a renewable energy system. I believe that that is part of the...
Stacy, I think I had said that I think that was part of Ready for 100, but I'm looking at the file name for that, and it says Off Act Resolution, so I think that's part of the Off Fossil Fuels campaign.
Okay, so since we've already had that, the Off Fossil Fuels campaign presentation, and we have agreed or stated that we would have further discussion in the January meeting of the Off Fossil Fuels Act, I propose that we would address this resolution at the next meeting, if the commission members concur.
I concur. Do we need a motion for that? So, okay.
Okay.
Could we have it as two different agenda items on the January meeting? One about the off officials pledge and one about the resolution for 100% clean energy, or the one about this resolution for going renewables. This resolution, what is it called? That is the Urbana 100% renewable.
Yes, but it's part of the fossil fuels.
Could it be two different line items on the agenda on January?
Okay, so just to clarify, we are asking that the resolution titled City of Urbana Calling for 100% Renewable Energy be a separate agenda item from the discussion of the Off Fossil Fuels Act itself.
Officials pledge.
Officials pledge. Okay.
Because there's two different things that they're asking for our support for the council to address.
You're correct. So yes, let's do that. Okay. Scott, you were just saying that the discussion for Ready for 100. Do you say we have or we have not? Okay, we have not discussed Ready for 100. All I have in my packet from them is the case study report. I'm sorry, is there additional packet information from the fact sheet?
It's 2 pages, picture of windmills at the top.
Yeah, no, I printed that. I don't know, maybe it didn't come off my printer. Okay. Is there any discussion related to the Ready for 100 campaign at this time?
It might be useful for that group to have a similar resolution if they wanted us to.
I think maybe there was one presented to City Council, but I didn't receive it.
Okay.
It appears I didn't receive it for this packet.
Because Urbana isn't part of the 100 cities that they're targeting, so.
But if we support, since we just voted our support for the I Matter resolution for the climate inheritance resolution, and that includes 100% renewable by 2025, then it's simply a matter of, in addition to signing that, we've already made the commitment, we should also sign this.
Sure, yeah, understand.
Right?
Scott, earlier this afternoon, there was a PowerPoint slide that was shared. Are you able to pull that up? Michael shared it from the Sierra Club. It was a single PowerPoint slide showing the differences between the kind of differences and similarities between the I Matter campaign, the Ready for 100 campaign, and the off fossil fuels. That was, I believe, in the same email that came with the 2017 case study report. That
It was called graphic
it should
for
be in your
tonight's
email.
meeting.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I would like to kind of throw that up onto the projector just so that we can all just review the similarities and maybe dissimilarities between the two. In particular, I would be interested in seeing how they align and yeah.
So, just between the I Matter pledge and the Ready for 100, they're both 100%. Well, okay. I Matter is 100% clean or renewable electricity, and Ready for 100 is 100% clean renewable energy, which is a big difference. The Ready for 100 asks towns to set their date sometime before 2050. And the I Matter pledge for the electricity is 2025 and the carbon by 2040. So they're not actually the same. You're right. Or thank you for pointing that out.
Is there anyone in the audience here tonight from the Ready for 100 campaign? Yes. Rebecca, please, you can come up and address us.
All right, so I hate to speak on behalf of them, but from my understanding, they don't have a resolution that they're working on, but we were definitely working with them with this I Matter resolution. So I think, Morgan, your interpretation was accurate that by supporting the Climate Inheritance Resolution, this was something that the people working on Ready for 100 were really supportive of as well. So I think they just wanted to show that this ongoing Ready for 100 campaign is also asking for very similar goals as the I Matter pledge or Inheritance Resolution. That's my understanding of why we have like all of that information together on the page, and like why we were grouped together on the agenda tonight.
Do they want the mayor to sign the pledge? Is that, because that's what it says here, over 180 mayors have signed the pledge.
That I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. When they did speak with us at City Council, the representative from Ready for 100 was more speaking in favor of the Climate Inheritance Resolution. So I can't speak for them on the mayor pledge part.
Morgan?
It'd be, I know someone just said this, but it'd be nice to see the pledge for us to review. You know, you said that they were going to have a speaker come talk with us, but they couldn't make it. Was that right? You said someone named Michael. Could that person join the January 9 meeting?
She's actually got class at this time for some period of time. I don't remember, or some conflict, reoccurring conflict. I don't remember the details.
Okay.
If there is no particular pledge or resolution written by Ready for 100, a resolution can be prepared that quotes, you know, the goals that are described in this PDF for City Council to vote on.
Okay. All right, are there any motions or proposals on taking up the issue of the Ready for 100 campaign and the mayor's pledge? Okay. I propose that we would do a little more outreach with the Ready for 100 campaign and see if they are available to speak with us at a future meeting, possibly January. Is there any other discussion on this agenda item? Okay. Our last agenda item this evening is a discussion on outreach to environmental organizations and local stakeholder groups to develop new lines of activity that support Urbana Climate Action Plan goals. Todd, I believe that you've said a bit this evening, at least a little bit earlier, speaking about creating some plans for more local stakeholder input and collaboration on the future climate action plan planning. Is there any discussion on this topic further that we'd like to discuss this evening?
So we have we have a climate action plan and we have some goals, and then we've talked about Ready for 100 and the iMatter pledge, and so what we've worked on has been a lot of policy and setting goals and targets. Now, along with the climate action plan, you know, we get regular updates from Scott, and you know, we've all had some role in some of the implementation activities, actually, you know, realizing some of these goals. And so I guess the other, you know, so I guess it's just a really important piece for us as we consider policies and goals, you know, is engaging the process and starting to, you know, we've talked about the difficulty in reaching these goals. It's, I mean, it's a really, it's a difficult challenge, and we can go around the world and ask people how to, and we're going to get a lot of head scratching. And so I think that what we need is a really robust stakeholder process and engaging. You know, we've had some groups engaging with council and with the commission on, you know, what some of the targets should be. And I guess I would like to see some engagement that is about the how-to piece, and how are we actually going to get this done. A couple of categories that I think about right away are the some of the advocacy groups, organizations that have either policy expertise or technical expertise in the whole range of activities that relate to accomplishing the goals and the targets that we're setting out, or, you know, asking the council to consider. And then we also have stakeholder groups, organizations, and just individual people that are affected personally, directly or indirectly, by these goals, or by, you know, spending towards these goals. And you know, the major achievements that we've had from the Climate Action Plan have been the municipal aggregation of residential electric and the solar programs. And I think we need to reach out beyond the commission and some of the immediate people that we talk with, and start finding out what are the next large and small initiatives that are going to, you know, drive those incremental and hopefully, you know, more step change improvements in our performance. And so I guess the idea is that we all, you know, I think we are all part of organizations, and we're familiar with organizations that represent activity and action, and that also represent the interests of community stakeholders. And I guess I'm interested in, as we consider path forward, you know, a broader engagement with these stakeholders and organizations to figure out, okay, how are we going to get this done, and what are some realistic things that we can accomplish in the near term, and you know, trying to find out what can we expect that people might do in the medium to long term. So I guess that's the introduction, kind of general idea. I guess I'd open up to questions or comments, or Stacy, if you have any, you know, any thoughts at this point.
Well, Todd, I'll just I'll turn a little bit back around on you. Do you have any ideas about ways or things that the commission may undertake in order to start addressing some of these issues in wanting to work more with these stakeholder groups?
So there's a bunch of things. We can start talking with people in organizations. So there's the informal conversations. There's Stacy, you and I have talked about some kind of some kind of event that convenes groups, and so this could be something like Environmental Organization Day. It could be something like a community conference and panel session. Those are I guess from the making these individual kind of like one-on-one small group discussions, but then there's also I think the big public community convening.
It sounds a lot like some of the things that we've done with the bike plans, and I've seen happen with the comprehensive plans or the long-range transportation plan, where there's a very, very targeted reach out to various groups that different locational groups like neighborhood associations, different socioeconomic groups, like the elderly, or various different groups of people and community members, and with a background, a specific workshop exercise of some kind for them to go through. And the Regional Planning Commission has done this, and I think that we should really investigate what it would take to ask them to coordinate a really community-wide stakeholder engagement for brainstorming, for finding things that our community is willing to support. We've thrown around this idea of a carbon tax, sustainability tax today a couple of times, but we've never gone out and found out what our community, how likely are we to support something like that? What do the developers think about it? Aren't they choosing to get LEED certified because then they get better, or more people choosing to rent their apartments and things like that? There's a lot of different components out there. So I'm curious if we could at least, can we find out what it might cost to pay for a stakeholder engagement plan like the Urbana Bike Plan did that, right?
The Urbana Bike Plan was very expensive.
Yes, like $70,000 or $300,000. What do you know?
I think it was in the tens. I don't remember.
Like 10,000?
Tens. I don't remember. I mean,
Yeah.
I would be
100
speculating.
maybe.
It's
Yeah.
just a sense.
But I'd be curious to know what it would cost, and is it something that the council would support to actually achieve this stakeholder engagement? And maybe there's different scales. Maybe there's something that could be funded that would do some of the baseline work. So it's not all Scott's job, and that we could support depending on how much funding it takes and what's really needed.
Are there planning grants for this kind of thing out there? I know we're not exactly in the best climate for this topic. No pun intended. But there's.
I don't see a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't think of seeing one
Okay.
announced. There may be. Something to consider. Several years ago, there was a number of groups that created what I describe as LEED for Cities, It's called Star Community Rating System. I'm sure it's not perfect, but it's a points-based system where all the points are, if you take them all together, it's a laundry list of everything you would ever do for sustainability, not just energy and climate issues, but sustainability broadly construed. And so, you know, the public engagement process, I would not expect is going to discover new strategies. They might highlight strategies that are most valued by our residents. But I don't think they're going to come up with a lot of new strategies. And I think that, you know, the one strategy to rule them all is funding. There may be more things we can do that are low cost, no cost that we haven't engaged in yet. But in terms of scaling up for something like carbon neutral, I think that's the one strategy we need to focus on.
Yeah, I think part of the engagement with stakeholders might be to generate new ideas, particularly from maybe industry or kind of, you know, groups that have some technical expertise. But I think another part of the stakeholder engagement is to generate the political will or the interest on the part of the stakeholders to advocate their elected officials to support not necessarily a carbon tax or sustainability tax, but support things that require you know, action on the part of council in terms of implementing them. So I don't know. I guess it depends on what our goals. We'd have to be clear about what our goals are for this kind of engagement. Are we looking for ideas, or are we looking to create buy-in for the ideas that we know are out there? I mean, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel necessarily. There's tons of ideas for how to accomplish a lot of these things. The problem, you know, at any scale is the political will to follow through. So I don't know. I think we'd have to be clear about what we want to accomplish. And I like Morgan's idea of at least reaching out to the RPC or you know, groups that have the expertise and that have done a lot of this, whether or not we can afford to do similar types of outreach, or if we can just get ideas or, you know, a framework for what they've done that we can implement on a, or, you know, do something on a smaller scale or more of a do-it-yourself in-house kind of thing.
I think it's I think part of the stakeholder process also to find out what people would be willing to do, because the city cannot compel people to do things in their homes and their businesses, and that's where most of our climate impact is. You know, the city can compel itself to do things to city properties, and it can compel people to do or not do things through some ordinances, but you know, it can't compel people to do fuel switching in their home because it's easier to meet targets with electricity than natural gas. So I think some of the stakeholder process, finding out what people would be willing to do, I think there's plenty of people out there that would be interested but don't exactly know how. I think there might be some contractors that may have, that may have an interest in, I don't know, if not to promote a trade show, but I think there's contractors that might have solutions that would be attractive to a lot of people if they had an opportunity to know about it. And so I don't know. Those are.
So one of the things that sort of I'm hearing, and I think is sort of just like important to point out, is that sustainability encompasses so much of our lives, and like business practice, government practices, our own habits and things in our own homes, that finding a one-size-fits-all stakeholder outreach process is going to be impossible, because it isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be outreach to local businesses in some ways. It's going to be outreach to contractors in another. It's going to be reaching out to homeowners for homeowner engagement. It could look like reaching out to the faith-based community on issues of sort of like social and environmental justice issues facing our community. So I want to really continue this conversation of what we can do, but I also wonder at how efficient it is for us to sort of hash out all of these different ways that we can do this in a meeting here this evening, or even in a future meeting, because it sort of gets like this is a lot of ideas and a lot of idea sort of planning. So the way forward from that is I think I would like it if there were perhaps 2 commission members. I don't think, can we have 2 commission members that work together without violating the Open Meetings Act? So I would like to have sort of 2 commission members volunteer to spearhead doing a little bit of this research, and perhaps working with Scott or reaching out to the like RPC for a framework or something, and kind of just keep me in the loop of what's going on, to come up with some proposals then that can be brought to a commission meeting to say, maybe I propose that we have this conference, or I propose that we reach out directly to contractors on this topic, in order to kind of work our way through this a little bit more expeditiously. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Are there any volunteers for that sort of ad hoc working group at this time? Thanks, Todd.
I am overbooked for the spring, but I'd be happy to be included in emails or be a talking point, someone to chat with. If you'll take the lead, I can be your backup. Two people or less, but you don't count because you're staff. Okay.
I could help out with Todd.
Then I will not.
All right, thank you very much. I think that this is like absolutely important that we continue this thread of thought, but some of the like idea creation is just going to happen offline, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for bringing this up. I think it's super important. Is there any other discussion on this agenda item? All right, then I'm going to move into the announcements. Are there any announcements this evening? Okay, not hearing any announcements. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All right, all in favor of adjourning this meeting?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. Meeting adjourned.